Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So there's still 30 of you checked in. The way this is going to work, and I made this clear, if you're not checked in at the start of class, I'm going to start marking you absent. I don't want to deal with 30 emails after class every day. So you should all bought the app by now. I don't care. Start it earlier, right? You have to be ready to check in when the class starts. I've done this several semesters. I have this problem. So, 20 seconds. But after this is the last time. We're going to start it on time, okay? I don't mind if something horribly wrong is wrong, but 20 emails a day, that thing's not working. Okay. All right. All right. So any questions about last time? Questions in class last time, the Obamacare case. We didn't have enough time for questions, but I think we covered everything. Okay, stop it now. Okay. So I want you to start off with this question, which I think will be a good bridge from the Obama to the cases for today. So pardon the what/who. This question fit a little bit better. The question is this: what/who can the federal government require to take actions? Okay, we'll go through this one. A state. B, a state official. A, an individual.
You're showing your
calendar, yeah.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
That's not what I want to do. Well, I don't want to stop it. Just keep going with it. You see it's on my calendar. Thank you, Quentin. Oh, I know what happened. I took a screenshot of where the thing was. Okay, well, I appreciate your honesty. Now you know where I'm going this week. Okay. It was excellent last night. It was a very good show. Anyone saw it last night? I saw it from anyway, so I'll give you another 10 seconds. A, a state. B, a state official. C, an individual. All the above or none of the above? Okay. All right, we'll stop it here. Okay. Okay. I didn't really go around the room, so I can't remember. Where did I leave off, I guess, last class? Does anyone recall?
You lectured the whole purpose.
No, I know the one before that. I know before that. This is why I have no idea. I'm sorry, Danny. I'm going to start back there and do your routine. This is a long gap between, so this will be an easy one for you to start. Danny, what'd you put here?
I thought it was just the individual, because like you can have like taxation and such, which goes to the federal government, which compels people to pay. But like you can't do a state. You can't specifically tell them to do something. You can incentivize them. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the state official. Okay. Tied in.
And by the way, I'm writing new questions this semester because several of you told me. I appreciate that you're watching last year's videos and you know the answers already. So I'm going to just write new questions every semester. That way I can keep a little surprised. It's actually similar to one last year, but twisted a little bit different if you notice, right? Not exactly what you're expecting, but similar concept. So I'm going to rephrase the question so you can't cheat. I actually am grateful you guys are watching the videos. And the microphone sound better? Okay.
It does.
Is it better?
Yeah. We can hear you much better, and a little bit better if someone's in the front part of the
back. Nothing. Yeah, it's trade-off. So I'd rather hear me better than plus or minus. Look, so here's the thing, right? When a student says something, their volume's usually pretty low, and I try to repeat everything they say anyway. So you're gonna get probably 80% of the class. Well, we have to walk around like this, holding it like a leash or something, but it works. There's no good wireless mic. It's too complicated. Okay. So anyway, yeah, new questions. Okay, so Denny, you said C.
Yeah.
Okay. Warren, what'd you put here?
I put the same thing here.
Put C. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, tell me, why'd you put C, Warren?
It was, basically what you said as well, that the Constitution doesn't allow them to, the Congress or the federal government to give states orders or to force their employees to carry out federal mandates.
Okay. So what was the holding then in the Obamacare decision? We did it last class, spent 2 hours on one case. What was holding NFIB concerning the individual mandate, Warren?
Then it was coercive.
Coercive.
The forcing the states.
No, I'm talking about the mandate. Give me the Medicaid part, but the mandate. What was the holding of the Obamacare case with respect to the mandate?
I think that it was constitutional because they considered it to be a tax.
Okay.
Tax power.
Okay, you're on the right track. Now, Jonathan, let me pick up with you, please. Did the court hold in the Obamacare decision that Congress can make people take actions? The way I put the question up there.
You can't regulate inactivity, right?
Oh, no, so my question was this, right? I think you flipped my question around, but I'll ask it again. You're on the right track, Jonathan. Can Congress make a person, an individual, take some action? What was the core holding of the Obamacare decision?
No, they can't make somebody take some action. They can't.
But what can they do? Finish it up. What can Congress do? Ava, you want
They
it?
can like give you an option, like if you don't do it, you can get penalized.
Oh, okay, exactly. Right, so the holding of the Obamacare decision, right? Congress can't make you take action, right? They can't make you buy health insurance. But what they can do, right? What they can do is penalize you for not taking that action in the form of a tax. They can make you pay a tax for not taking that sort of action. Then,
I mean, obviously I'm wrong here, but the notion of like you can conscript people, the government can conscript people. You're forcing people to take action.
you're talking about the draft now, right?
Yeah, like they have that power.
Ah.
They can imprison you.
So let me just pause in the draft for a minute. It didn't come up in the litigation, but a lot of people discussed at the time. Is the draft, right? I'm sure a lot of you selected service, you're registered, right? Is the draft constitutional? And there was actually a lot of litigation during World War I about whether the draft violated the 13th Amendment. Right? But whether the draft violated the 13th Amendment. Okay. There are some other cases, though, that also involve the government making you take action. Can the government force you to undergo a vaccination for a disease?
Well, they used to forcibly sterilize people.
That was my next case. Can the government force a person to undergo a sterilization? Right? We'll do these cases later this term. The answer to both questions is yes and yes. The court had sterilization became required, but then jumped my gun, right? The court held that whether you want it or not, can be forced upon you to prevent breaks and the like. So, I want to just dwell on this question for a minute, right? And this is the reason why I ask it this way. I'm not trying to... But the same thing, depending on the context of things. Congress make you take action as in buying a commercial product or commerce clause? No. Congress's power to raise an army requires you to be conscripted into the service? Yeah. And the state, so actually the state's a little different. This is federal. And the states require you to force vaccination or force sterilization. You have the power to protect the welfare of people. Police power? Yeah. So this individual one is tricky. Right? The Obamacare decision you guys read didn't really hit any points. It was focusing solely on commerce powers, right? But at least under commerce powers, which is what the Obamacare decision was talking about, right? We're talking about NFIB and commerce. Commerce and necessary proper, right? Talking about commerce and necessary proper, the answer is no. Right? If you're talking about taxing power, they say, well, they can't make you, but they can penalize you for not doing it. If you're talking about raising a military, this is Denny's question, they can make you do it. Right? So I want you to look at these questions and I framed it at a fairly high level of generality. But when you drill down, the answer varies a lot. Okay? All right, so the answer here is that students don't like these sorts of questions. Because, like, what's the answer, Blackman, right? The answer is it depends. What provision of the Constitution Congress is relying on. This is why in the Obamacare decision, the chief went through commerce, then necessary and proper, okay, and then taxing. You have to touch all of your bases to find the various grounds to be upheld. But at least under FIB, commerce, necessary and proper, Congress can't make you take an action. Okay? Now, okay, but let's look at states, right? Congress make a state take an action. Oh, okay. So what do you mean states can penalize? Sorry, the Congress can penalize a state. What does that mean?
Like they can withhold funds from them and not taking specific.
Okay, very good. In what case is this?
Use a dole.
Very good. Right. Get in the habit when I start asking you a question, like give me a case to back it up. And Gabriel's 100% correct. This is dole. Congress can't make a state take an action, right? They can't do something. They can't make a state pass a law to raise their drinking age. They can't put dangle money in front of the states and say, hey, if you want to keep getting this money, you have to do X. Or you have to stop doing X, whatever it happens to be. If you want this Medicaid money, you got to cover more people. Dole pulled out certain limitations on that, and NFIB actually found a line was crossed. In the NFIB case, the court said this is no longer about persuasion, this is coercion. States, economic dragooning, to require them to engage in this Medicaid expansion, right? So the answer for states is no, they can't, right? And that's dole. Right? States can't be required to take certain actions. That's dole. Okay? Now, is your hand up?
Yeah. So would you consider the Supreme Court a part of the federal government?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think I know where you're going with this. Give me one more line.
Yeah. Do you consider the Supreme Court
I know.
part of
Give
the
me.
federal
I know.
government?
Ask your follow-up. I think I know where you're going with this.
I just want to know the questions because that can depend on my
Are you
follow-up.
thinking of citizens' dissent?
Oh, no, I'm thinking of Gibbons case. In that
Oh,
case-
that's not okay. So explain more. Okay, give me more Gibbons. I thought you were in a different direction.
Yeah, so where I'm going with this, is you're saying that the federal government, and there's other cases, I'm going to use the Gibbons case, where the federal government told the state, I believe it was New York, case, you have to allow this ship on your waterway. You're required to allow Mr. Gibbons to run the ship. They had excluded him before now, and they didn't do anything. They said, you must now allow Mr. Gibbons.
So Joe Stevens makes this exact point in his this Printz,
Yep.
right? It's a strange fact that Congress can't order state officials to take action when the court can, because the courts tell states all the time what to do, and the courts tell state officials all the time what to do. So Stevens, I think Souter makes a similar point as well, says, how can it be, right? How can it be, one second, how can it be that the court has the power to command officials what to do, and the court has the power to command states, but Congress lacks that power? In other words, how could it be, I think, Clint, this is your question, that the court has broader remedial powers than does Congress? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I didn't use his dissent because that was an actual law. I mean, that wasn't a good thing. I used this case because I give, yeah, I have the idea.
Good. John? It's together here, right? I'll ask this question like this. When the court in Gibbons told New York they couldn't enforce their monopoly on the steamboats. What authority was the Supreme Court relying on?
The permanency clause. The permanency clause.
Okay, and what does this permanency clause say? You don't have to, okay, well, I have it up here.
The federal law trumps state law.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I have it up. Okay, it's permanency clause, right? So, was the Supreme Court acting based on a mere statute, or the acting based on a provision? Oh, he's still going. Well, what gave the Supreme Court the authority to decide New York's law?
The Constitution.
Right. So I think the answer to your question, let me for everyone who's maybe not following. The reason why the court has the authority to tell states what to do is because, in their mind, the Constitution gives them that power. The states, by enacting these sorts of laws, according to, are not acting pursuant to, or they can't commandeer. Right? In other words, the laws involving commandeering, those laws themselves, according to Scalia, are not valid. And because those laws are not themselves valid, they're not the supreme law of the land. And therefore, they can't be used. Right? This is a point I'll mention briefly about later today. Why are the laws in Printz and New York unconstitutional? Right? What provision of the Constitution renders them unlawful? Who's next? I can't see the next. Oh, that's way too faint. I can't see. Oh, there we go. Okay. Colby, yeah, there you are. Okay. Colby, what provision, under what provision of the Constitution are the New York laws, under what provision of the Constitution are the laws of New York and Printz invalidated? And this is a trick question. What provision are they invalidated under?
Well, the argument comes in on that it violates the 10th Amendment, but also that under the dual sovereign.
Trey, you want to take a stab? That's what everyone thinks. That's what most. It's not. The 10th Amendment's related, but it's not. That's not it by itself. Colby?
Would it be more closely related to the taxing power?
You stab, Derek?
Yeah, stab. Is it the proper part of the necessary?
Oh, he's right. Everyone, repeat it. You say it louder, please.
The proper part of necessary.
Yeah. This is why I make such a big deal about necessary and proper. In every single case where Congress is acting, they're almost always doing. Why? Because it gives them a lot of extra room, a lot of flexibility. So, the argument, and this is exactly Clinton's question. The reason why these laws are not the supreme law of the land, and the reason why Congress can't use them to commandeer state officials, is because they themselves are not passed pursuant to Congress's powers, according to the majority, that they themselves are not proper. Everyone see that?
Yeah.
Right? And Scalia makes his point at the very end. He and Stevens have a back and forth. This wasn't why I wanted to go, but it's a very important point. Okay? Let's finish up our quiz question, right? So, we did Dole. Okay? All right, Matt, I'll try to come back to you. Trey, can Congress require a state official? Can Congress require a state official to take these sorts of actions? Okay, good. And the case is Printz. Why not?
Have the authority to overstep state policy.
Okay. And why not? What?
The 10th Amendment.
That's not the answer, though. It's part of the answer, but not the entire answer. Why is the law in Printz an improper exercise of federal power?
The only thing I recall is Scalia saying ultraviolet overpowered Congress. I don't recall the exact act.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Jonathan?
Is it because of the discussion on page 262 about accountability, where the federal government takes accountability away from representatives who represent
That's part of it, okay? Okay, that's part of it. That's part of it. Let's do the cases. We'll answer this question a little bit more in depth. But at least this much you guys understand, right? The case that says Congress can't require state action is Dole. The case where it says Congress can't require state officials to take action is Printz. And at least with respect to commerce necessary and proper, which is what we've learned so far, individuals is NFIB. I didn't expect you to get the draft stuff, so but you're right about that part. But at least as far as we learned, right? Right? Oh, a lot of you put C, right? Well, that's if you put C because you throw the draft, you're right. But generally, the answer is none of the above, right? At least what we learned so far. Congress can't require any of these entities to take action. And don't forget the Obamacare decision. It wasn't a mandate that was upheld. It was a tax on not having insurance. And there's a big difference between the two. Okay? So the answer there is none of the above. If you thought like Denny about the draft and other things, I'll give it to you. But that wasn't, we haven't learned it yet, so I didn't think it was fair to test you on that. Yeah, Evan?
But what about Wicker? Doesn't that help bolster C?
No, it doesn't. Did the government in Wickard require him to take action? What was the law in Wickard about?
Preventing him from growing wheat for his own.
Stopping him from acting, right? Or penalizing him if he grew too much wheat. That's the fundamental difference in the Obamacare case. The difference between stopping you from doing something or telling you how to do something and making you do it in the first place. That is what was novel in Obamacare. They were making you take an action that hadn't been done before, right? Which is why I think C is probably not the best answer here. Yeah, Damon.
So this question really depends on how you define the action. So if paying tax is action or not, or stopping someone from doing something is, that is, I see that as sort of action. I mean, so
well, that was a dissent in that Obamacare, right? They said there's no difference between not buying insurance and deciding to self-insure, right? At least under the majority opinion of Obamacare, the court said they can't require you to purchase commercial product. Make sense?
yes, but on the other hand, Congress can make you take an action to pay tax, right? Am I right?
Yes.
So they can force
So
people to
one of
do
the
some sort
difficulties of these
action.
poll, let me interrupt you. One of the difficulties of these poll questions is why I don't give multiple choice questions in the exam. Because you can fight them to death. And you often do. I will not give you a multiple choice question in the exam. I promise I won't. The purpose of these questions is to get you thinking, not to fight the question. Law students love finding the question. The phrasing, right? I try to find a phrasing that works with 3 different concepts. It never works perfectly. So I tweak them every year. Now at least. But what I want you to recognize is under the Obamacare decision, at least with respect to commerce and necessary and proper, that answer is no. About buying. Taxing is a different story. Yeah, Clint.
Do you appreciate it? Do you appreciate our
I do.
Okay.
Yep.
Making sure we're not doing something that you're not appreciating.
Yeah. No, I'm always grateful. I'm always grateful when students want to push back. What's that?
I just didn't want this to be frustrating your class. Okay.
Nah, it's really hard to frustrate me. Very impossible. Okay. Everyone see this? No, the reason why I mention is I had some students last year say, some students last semester say I was trying to trick them with these questions that they're often very close. It's not about trickery. These are often very close questions. And were I to put this in an exam in an essay form, I would gladly accept both sides of this argument. The reason why I do the poll question is to quickly put you on the spot. There's no good way of doing a poll question with words. Right? So there are pros and cons to all the different types of pedagogy. There really are, and I give this a lot of thought. But if I shorten the debates but the wording of the question, you'll indulge me. Fair enough? All right. Let's do the first case. Yeah, Trey.
If Congress cannot, if the federal government cannot require an individual to do something, why do we have a Bill of Rights? It seems counterintuitive that if there's protection of what an individual is protected from, then doesn't that mean that by its nature, the federal government can in fact restrict an individual to do?
So what's the Bill of Rights, Trey?
It's a right thing with the state what Congress cannot do, what the federal government cannot do.
So let's take an easy example, right? Congress should make no law abridging the freedom of speech, right? What does that do with persons? Do they have to speak? Is a person required to speak? So then what's the relevance here?
The relevance is that Congress cannot hinder you from.
Good.
So that's an individual. To me, it's an individual right of free speech, right? Congress cannot pass a law. The state can, apparently, but not the federal government. So it's an individual right to have that. So if Congress can't tell me what I can and cannot say, how can they not use that? Use the other powers that are enumerated to them.
Okay, well, let's use an example, right? There's an amendment that says Congress can't make you say or not say something, right? Is there an amendment saying Congress can't make you grow wheat? Is that an amendment?
No.
Let's say, let me take Evan's question and flip it, right? Let's say Congress passed a law requiring people to grow wheat. Say there's a massive food shortage, and farmers are required to grow at least X acres of wheat. There's no amendment about that. There's no farm agricultural amendment to the Constitution. Can Congress make you grow a field full of wheat? See, even beyond the Bill of Rights, which we'll study briefly at the end of this class, there are certain things that Congress can't make you do under this rule in NFIB. Okay? Other questions? Yeah, Abdul.
I'm a little bit confused. So you're saying yes, Congress can force you to grow wheat?
No,
It can't.
under the rule in NFIB, that would be unconstitutional.
Because you said, what is it? They can't make you buy broccoli.
Because they can't make you buy broccoli. They can't make you buy broccoli. They can't make you grow wheat. In fact, I actually think a mandate to grow wheat might actually amount to a form of slavery. Under the 13th Amendment, you're actually conscripting someone in labor. I don't know how far that would go. All right, any other questions? Very good, good questions. All right, yeah. Oh, God, that's so faint, I can't read that.
It's Sam.
Yeah, take a marker afterwards, I can't read that.
If you're gonna grow something on your land, you're going to grow wheat. Like, if you're gonna use your land for growing something, you're gonna grow wheat on your land.
Oh, so you're saying the law is, if you're growing something, it has to be wheat?
Yeah.
I think that would still be a mandate of what to do. A person can say, you know what, never mind, I don't want to grow anything. The way farmers usually work nowadays is they get lots of money from the government. And the government says, if you want this money, you have to grow X or not grow X, right? But I don't think there are any laws that compel them to grow something. There was another case in the Supreme Court, I'll mention this briefly. I teach this in property, but it's relevant. Where the government says, if you grow raisins and you grow more than a certain amount, you have to surrender your raisins to the government. And the Supreme Court found that this was unconstitutional under the takings clause, so taking a property, but it's the same idea. They can't make you give away something unless they're paying you for it. Question?
Yeah.
Sorry?
That answers my question.
Good, I'm glad. Other questions? All right, let's move on. So, Matt, did I call on you?
No.
Okay. You want to give me the facts, please, in New York versus United States?
So this was a case concerning the disposal of radioactive waste.
Radioactive waste, right? Where do we find such waste? Is this like really dangerous stuff right here?
I think this was low-level stuff like in your watchdog.
Yeah. This is not like, Swamp Thing. This is not like really bad waste. This is like, if you have a watch dial that glows, or like a smoke detector, like little. This is low level, but still dangerous stuff, right? So, just Matt, what's the problem with low-level waste? Why is it problematic?
It's still radioactive.
Yeah.
And people don't want it to be disposed next to where they live.
Yeah. So this is a classification. You'll learn this in property. NIMBY, right? You know what NIMBY stands for? Thank you, sir. Yeah, exactly right. You're done for that, right? NIMBY is not in my backyard, right? This is an aspect of zoning and property law where no one wants stuff that's bad in their backyard. It happens everywhere. So this creates a nationwide problem. There are only 3 sites in the country that permitted the dumping of radioactive waste. Kendall, why is this a problem that in a 50-state country, there are only 3 states that have a facility to contain this waste? Very good. And so, Kendall, what happens if those 3 states decide, say, screw it, we're not going to take, this dumping stuff from New York and New Jersey. We're not going to take your garbage anymore. What happens?
The states would have to, the states that are being refused would have to take their.
Well, and just make one point clear. Are the states people creating this waste? This wasn't so clear in the case, but I want to make this point clear. Who's actually creating the waste? Businesses, right? So here's the setup, right? You're the Timex company, right? And you make watches. And you have a facility in upstate New York, and you make these little glow-in-the-dark, watches, right? It's not New York's problem that you're creating this waste. But if there's nowhere for you to dump it, you're put in a very tough spot, right? So, Raven, what did Congress try to do to, they did a few things, but at least let's start off. What did Congress try to do here to remedy this problem where there aren't enough dumps to put all this waste?
They created a waste plan and tried to give states incentives.
Okay, good. So one of the things they did is said, we'll give incentives to states to deal with this, right? Now, Raven, did they require the states to build these dumps themselves? Or let me ask the question differently. Can Congress require states to build a radioactive waste dump? No, why not? Why can't Congress require states to just build it themselves?
Would it have to be like they'd have to create a state law?
Oh, and can Congress force a state to pass a law?
No.
Okay, how come? You're on the right track. You're almost there.
They can try to persuade them that
Okay, and last one, I promise I'm almost done. Why can't Congress make a state pass a law? What does that do that's bad? Malia, you want to take a stab?
Wouldn't it like, it would take away like the dual sovereignty?
Yes, exactly. It intrudes on the dual sovereignty, right? States have their own governments, their own legislatures. They pass their own laws. Congress can't direct, it can't commandeer a state to pass a law. That much is easy, right? So Malia, so instead of making the states pass laws to build waste dumps, what did Congress try doing instead?
They gave them incentives.
Okay. And incentives to do what?
Well, there's 3 of them.
Okay.
The first was like a monetary incentive, it's like a surcharge.
Good. Yeah, so, yeah.
Or it was constitutional, that if you do that, it's like a tax.
Very good. So yeah, I'll go through these one at a time, right? So the first one, they gave monetary incentives. That is, the 3 states that had these facilities could charge a fee, right? An additional fee. Okay? So states had to basically pay more money to dump waste there. Okay. The second one was called the Access Initiatives. I'm not too concerned about that one, which talks about denial of access. But the most severe one is the third one. Okay? This is what's called the take title provision. That's actually what the case is primarily about. Stephen, what was this take title provision?
If the state doesn't have a place to properly dispose of the waste, the state that produced the waste takes ownership, title of it, and the state's liable to dispose of it.
Very good. Yeah. This is called the take title provision, and it's exactly what Stephen said. They have to take title or take ownership of the waste created in their state. And again, this is waste created by Timex and private companies. It's not the government's waste. But the states must take ownership of this if they're not able to work out a deal. What was it, by 1993, right? With one of these states that have a dumping lot. So the states have 7 or 8 years to get their act together. If they can't work out a compact is like an agreement. If they can't work out a compact with one of these 3 states, which probably involves a lot of money being paid, they're required to take ownership of the arrangement. Now, I want to mention this point briefly. Judge, where did the idea of this take title provision come from? Like, who came up with this idea? I mean, who developed this idea?
I'm not sure.
Anyone know the answer? Yes, Samuel.
Congress?
Well, more precisely than Congress. Yeah, Stacey. Yeah, the states. The Governors Association put together this proposal, right? So this is the point that dissent makes, I think, very well. This is an idea that didn't come from Congress, right? This idea came from the states. The states voluntarily, including New York, put themselves into this regime. They wanted it. So there is a little bit of an unfairness, right? Where New York said, let's do this thing with the incentives and take care. And then once it did, then they sued about it, right? They challenged it in court, right? So there's a little bit of an irony there. But the majority, O'Connor, doesn't seem too bothered by it. We'll get there in a bit. Why? Okay? So, Judge, why did New York challenge then this law? Forgetting the hypocrisy, we'll put that aside for a minute, right? But what was New York's objection about why this law is unconstitutional?
They thought it was not a proper exercise of power because it's a valid amendment.
Okay. Well, mostly right, yeah. Okay. So so New York said that this law intrudes on their state sovereignty, and they reference the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, we don't talk about too much, but it does come up, and it says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Right? So, Herberto, what relevance does the 10th Amendment have to this case? I just read it for you. What relevance does this have? Yeah. What's the relevance?
That the state will become an agent of the federal government if they follow
But yeah, just stick with me for a minute. What does the 10th Amendment actually state? What does it actually contribute to this case? I want to focus on this point for a minute.
It's like dual sovereign concept because it gives the power to the state that are not linked to the Constitution.
Roberto, does New York's law requiring does Congress's law requiring New York to take ownership of this waste in any way violate the 10th Amendment by itself? What does it say? Just read it.
Yes, it does.
Let me ask this question differently, Roberto. If a power is delegated to Congress, do the states have that power?
No.
Okay, good. Everyone see that. If a power is delegated to Congress, the states lack that power. This is Gibbons, which Clint mentioned a few minutes ago, right? If Congress has a power, the states don't have it. But the flip side, Roberto, what if Congress is not given a power?
Then the states have it.
Very good. So you have to ask yourself, does the Constitution give Congress the power to do X? If Congress has that power, the states are disabled. If Congress doesn't have that power, then it's reserved to the states or to the people. So Kelly, I'll move on to you now. So how do we know then, or let me ask the question differently, what's the question the court has to ask then about New York's law, right? What is always the question the court has to ask? The threshold question. Is this law constitutional? What must we ask ourselves? You're answering my third question down the road. You're jumping a step, right? What do we always ask? If I ask you, Kelly, is this law constitutional? What am I asking you? What am I asking you to respond to me? What must you always check to see if a law is constitutional? Good. Good. Right. So we ask ourselves, does Congress have this enumerated power? Now, think about this for a second. When I say does Congress have the enumerated power, what am I actually asking? Is it a power delegated to Congress?
Oh.
Right? Is this power delegated by the Constitution to Congress? We know Article 1, Section 8 lists a bunch of them: commerce, taxing power, post office, right, coining money, etc. So if the power is in fact delegated to Congress, then the states don't have it, and there's no problem. The 10th Amendment, and this is a tricky point, doesn't actually mean that certain laws are unconstitutional. What it merely says is, if a power is not delegated to Congress, then the states have it. But if a power is delegated to Congress, under the Supremacy Clause, it's a supreme law of the land, and it trumps state law. So you got to read the Supremacy Clause, the 10th Amendment, together, right? If Congress has the power, they create supreme law of the land. If Congress doesn't have that power delegated to them, it's reserved to the states, right? You can't have both. It's either one or the other. There might be some overlap, which I don't care about here, but as a general matter, you can't have both. Okay? So, Elena, let me ask this question now. How do we know then if the power to enact this take title provision is delegated to the United States? How do we know that? How do we know if this is one of the powers that Congress has to require states to take ownership of this waste? Okay, very good. That's exactly where we start. And so what enumerated power would Congress have to rely on here as a starting measure? I told you this is almost always the answer. But where do you start? That's my second answer. Remember I said you were 3 down the road, now you're in question 2, right? What power would you always start with in almost every case? And what's relevant here? Yes, ma'am, right? Commerce Clause. Why is a Commerce Clause relevant? What is literally happening with this program? What are states doing? What is Timex doing, right? What's literally happening here? And where's the waste traveling? Thank you. Yes. This is literally shipping waste across state lines, right? This is literally interstate commerce. There's no, I think even Justice Thomas will go along with it. This is interstate commerce, right? You are shipping commercial stuff across state lines. Maybe Thomas would, I don't know, but I'll go along with it, right? You're shipping stuff across state lines. You don't need substantial effects, right? You don't need to do this aggregation. This is literally shipping stuff across state lines. Okay. So, Bianca, let me ask you this question. Does the power to regulate interstate commerce have any limits? Are there limits on how Congress can exercise its commerce powers? Okay, good. And what are those limits that O'Connor identifies in this case? This is just, Jonathan's favorite, Justice O'Connor, right? What's O'Connor's limit that she identifies here? You're answering 2 questions down the road again. You guys are way ahead of me. I actually like it, but like, remember in math when you're in elementary school you have to show your work, right? None of you like showing your work. You just want to give the answer. I want you to show your work, because that's where you learn. I want you to show your work. So show your work, Bianca. How do you get to there, right? What limit does Justice O'Connor give on Congress's commerce powers? This is new. We haven't done this before directly. A little bit in NFIB, but not directly, right? What are the limitations imposed on Congress's commerce powers? Okay, good. And what is that commandeering principle? Very good. Okay, here's what she said. So the holding, right, the nub of this case is that as broad as Congress's commerce powers are, they're limited by federalism, right? That the commerce powers themselves are limited by the principles of federalism. In other words, when Congress wants to regulate a business, right, shipping coal or shipping sugar or whatever, there are no federalism concerns there. It's a private business. But when Congress wants to use its commerce powers to regulate a state, you got to consider federalism, right? These are these external constraints, right? These limitations from federalism onto the commerce powers. Now, I'm going to preempt the question someone will ask me, where do these come from, right? Someone's asking, where does this come from? The court's fuzzy, right? The court's fuzzy on this, on the roots of federalism. You can look to the 10th Amendment, sure, right? It's relevant, but it doesn't get you where you need to go. And a lot of people attack the commandeering doctrine as basically made up. And Justice Stevens, I think, does this very effectively in his dissent, right? Where is this in the text of the Constitution, right? It's not there. So the answer then, right, and this I think is Scalia's does it much better than O'Connor does, but Scalia does as well, is that it comes from necessary and proper clause, right? Okay. That in almost every case where Congress acts with the Commerce Clause, they need necessary and proper along the way, right? Think of it this way. Congress can regulate the shipment of waste between the states, right? That's fine. Right? If they say we want to use, tanker trucks with certain security measures, safety, so that they don't blow up on the road. Okay, that's fine. But there's an incidental power at issue, right? This is the McCulloch test. And follow me here. This is a little bit tricky. Can Congress, as part of its powers to regulate interstate commerce with the shipment of waste, incidentally force states to take ownership of the waste? Say that again. Right? Do it like this. Right? So the major power, right, is about the shipment of waste. That's no doubt they can do that, right? And then the incidental power is, if states aren't able to ship this waste, they have to take title. Right? So the big major power they can regulate is how waste is shipped. But the incidental power that comes along with it under necessary and proper is take title. So here we have what's under the Commerce Clause, and here we have what's under necessary and proper. Right? They can definitely regulate the shipment of waste. I don't have any objection there. But according to the majority, can, as an incidental power, can they force you to take title? This is McCulloch v. Maryland. Can Congress regulate money between the states? Sure they can. Can they charter a bank to make that more effective? Yes. Right? Chartering a bank was an effective, convenient, conducive means to regulate commerce. But can you sweep in the take title provision as an incidental aspect of the shipment of waste? Now, I want to repeat a phrase that was used in the Obamacare case, which is from McCulloch as well. There's great substantive and independent power. Right? This is a phrase from McCulloch v. Maryland. Is forcing states to take title this great power on its own? Right? Can you sweep that into the far less consequential regulation of shipment? And this is the analysis, right, from McCulloch v. Maryland. Right? Necessary and proper gives you incidental powers to put into execution the foregoing powers. But if you have this little bitty shipment of waste and this humongous mandate of states to take ownership, you can't sweep in this elephant into this little mouse hole, right? You got this regulation of commerce and shipment, that's fine, but you can't sweep in this major, substantive, great power to make states keep this waste. That is what the court says is a bridge too far. So even if, again, this is a necessary incident of the interstate marketplace, it's not a proper incident of federal power. And because it's not proper, the powers are not delegated to Congress. And because the powers are not delegated to Congress, who keeps them? Thank you, the states. Exactly right. That's the framework, right? Let me just read again. Like a second, Cameron, right? Because this is a great substantive and independent power, it's not a power that Congress has. And because it's not a power delegated to Congress, it's reserved to the states. That's where the 10th Amendment comes in. It's not by itself. Congress can regulate the shipment or commerce clause, but they can't use necessary and proper to sweep in the take title provision. Therefore, it's not a proper citizen of federal power. It's not delegated to Congress, and the states retain it. New York wins. I wish O'Connor wrote that. She didn't, but that's the holding of New York. Yeah, Cameron.
Would the federal government even have the authority to take title over the waste themselves?
Sure, why not? Yeah, Congress has what's called a property clause, which no one ever studies. But Congress can take ownership of property. There's, they have federal lands, they have they have submarines that have nuclear waste. I mean, it's not a big deal, right? But I want just to get that part right. Generally, the Commerce Clause is really broad, and if Congress wants to regulate, Timex Corporation, they can do that to the hilt, interstate commerce. But there are additional constraints imposed on Congress when they're regulating states. Those are the constraints of federalism. And what the court's basically saying here is you can't sweep in, right? You can't shove this huge elephant into a tiny mouse hole, right? Of making states take title for something mundane like, having safe trucks to carry waste across state lines, right? That's pretty trivial stuff. Now, I'll give you the other side. There's no real textual basis for this, right? You saw this sort of gymnastics that they get to. There's like this 3-step process. That, Stevens, I think, is probably right. There's no clear textual basis for it at all. But that is the basis of O'Connor's ruling. And this is how you get the commandeering doctrine, right? That laws that commandeer, that force states to take action, are not proper exercises of federal power. And because it's not proper exercise of federal power, it's not delegated to Congress, it's then reserved to the states. So the states maintain the power to decide whether or not to keep ownership of this waste or not. Everyone get that point. It's a very subtle point. And again, I wish O'Connor made that clear. She didn't. Scalia does a slightly better job. Roberts, I think, does the best job in the Obamacare case 20-something years later. Yeah, Kevin.
So does necessary just mean, I guess, convenient
Yes.
for carrying out enumerated powers, and proper means not violating federalism? So you mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, Marshall and McCulloch said, what does proper mean? It can't violate the spirit of the Constitution, right? What the hell is the spirit of the Constitution? This is how the court has interpreted it 200 years later, after McCulloch. Yeah, Clint.
So one of the cases said that it was appropriate and unprohibited. That was the way that it was defined as proper, right? That was the McCulloch case.
McCulloch, Maryland?
Yeah.
But Roberts, I always confuse him. Marshall had this one line where he uses this phrase, this great substantive independent power, right? If Congress is doing this great substantive independent power, GSIP, I remember it, then it's not proper. It's not permissible, right? What makes it impermissible is a GSIP, right? Again, this is fuzzy. And again, if you want to go back, reread the Roberts opinion on necessary and proper, he states it better than anyone else. It's only 2 pages. It's short. But that's like the best summary you'll see.
My question was, so we've all agreed that it's proper. Has there been any kickback against? So we've seen what's necessary. We've seen kickback against necessary, saying, or what we've defined necessary pretty well.
Yeah.
Saying that it is necessary to do this, to have the bank. It's necessary, and so forth. Has there been a good case that just very well defines what is a proper?
I'm telling you, Obamacare is the best one you're going to get, and there's not much there. But Roberts describes it, and I like this phrase, elephant and mouse hole, right? You can do this little thing like regulating shipment. You can't squeeze in this massive, unprecedented action of requiring states to take ownership of something. That's never been done before, right? This is why the title of my book was Unprecedented, right? This is the fact that something's never been done before is a hint that maybe Congress can't do it. Not necessarily, right? Lots of things have never been done before, then they're done. It's okay, we did it, right? Novelty doesn't mean it's illegal. Okay. So everyone get that part of the opinion. Any questions on that part of the opinion? We'll do this again when we get to Printz. Scalia does a little bit more clearly. Min, let me ask you a question, please. I think Kendall alluded to this before, but why does the Constitution protect states, right? What's the goal of protecting state sovereignty? What does that add? What does that contribute to our, you know, to our republic? The protection of states. Oh, you gotta talk louder. I can't hear you. Okay, but what's being balanced? Why is that balance important? Or why should states have that autonomy? Why? Oh, Ruben, you want to take this? Why are states protected?
They're closer to the people, so they can like make laws bettering for people because they're closer. The government's like a whole different lot.
Oh, you're getting closer, right? So, Kenny, let me ask this. I'll get you guys a second, all right? Let's just go down the row. Kenny, why is the fact that states are closer to their people important? Right? What does that help promote?
Decentralization.
Okay, and why is that important? Why is decentralization important? What does it ultimately promote?
More direct democracy.
Okay, good. And what does direct democracy yield? Now you guys aren't jumping at doing the opposite. You're not taking my bait. What does direct democracy, decentralization promote? You're on the right track, Kenny.
Fairness.
Fairness. Okay, closer. Andrew, what does O'Connor say those things promote?
Is it to the limits on the federal government?
Yeah, why is that important? What does that do?
Establish or differentiate the member.
And why is that important?
So states retain their citizens.
And why is that important? What does it ultimately promote? We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Sam? And what does federalism promote? There's an end game here. You know, the old Republican Swift. Right? What's the?
She talks a lot about accountability.
And what does that promote? What's the ultimate goal of all this stuff we're talking about? Not America. Freedom. Thank you. Liberty. Right? You guys were jumping out of your seats. Yeah. This is O'Connor's discussion. This is one of the most important, one of her most significant contributions to the court, right? O'Connor, Kennedy wrote a number of opinions throughout the 80s and 90s that discusses how federalism, how the separation of powers promotes freedom, individual liberty. And you all said the answer is why, right? So one of you said decentralization, right? When government is closer to you, they're more responsible. They're more accountable, right? If you have your local, city rep and he votes for something you don't like, you go yell at him. He's like, "Oh wow, that's bad. I'm going to change my mind," right? If your senator does something you don't like, you vote against him. It's like, all right, whatever, right? As government is further from the people, it's a general matter. Not always, but general matter, less responsive, less accountable. The thinking is having a closer government to you will make you have more freedoms because they'll be more respective of your needs. But there's another one, which a few of you, I think Min alluded to this a minute ago. Checks and balances are good, right? James Madison, right, wrote in the Federalist that ambition must be made to counteract ambition. This is when you're reading for the first day. And ideally, if say you have a very oppressive federal government and you have a very progressive, repressive versus progressive, right? You have a very authoritarian federal government and a very friendly state government, they can push against each other and ensure that people have general freedoms. It could also happen that the state government is authoritarian, which happened during Jim Crow, and it's a federal government trying to promote rights. But having these dual sovereigns, these two elements, butting heads, as a general matter, will yield more freedom for the individual. So when we say we're protecting states' rights, at least according to O'Connor, that's not about protecting states because states are nice. It's ultimately protecting individual freedom. But we've seen in this class that states' rights and federal power don't always yield that way, right? During the Prague case, right? It was Pennsylvania states' rights trying to stop the fugitive slave trade, and the court said that's not allowed. So it goes back and forth, depending which time frame you're in of how this shakes out. But O'Connor makes his point, I think, very well, that the reason why states are protected is for ultimately protecting freedom. So any questions to that? So a lot of things, you guys are jumping out of your seats. Hey, Carlos?
Well, I was just going to say really quickly that when we're trying to look for the answer is that what the Constitution was trying to do, they were trying to move away from monarchy, so they were trying to actually grant the rights of or decentralize the power, because they didn't want the power residing in the federal government, so they had to grant either rights or delegate that authority to other people.
Very good. Yeah, and I think let's go back to the 10th Amendment. It's not just reserving the rights and powers to the people. The states. It's also to the people themselves. So the basic structure of our Constitution is the people, right? It was the people that ratified the Constitution, we the people, not the states. The states approved the Articles of Confederation, but it was people who actually approved the Constitution, which is a very big shift. Daniel?
Two questions. One, I know that who's White, I think it is, gives a dissent about the whole contract compact thing.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification, is there really any difference between a compact and a contract? Because it seems like they all agreed upon, or is that just two?
The Constitution calls them compacts.
Okay.
So for example, right? I'm assuming all of you have Texas driver's licenses, right? If you drive to Oklahoma and you get pulled over by an Oklahoma trooper and show them your Texas license, why are they required to accept it? You ever think about that? So there's no federal law saying that all 50 states must honor licenses. There was called a compact, and all states are included in this. It says if you have a validly issued, Texas driver's license and you go to, Oklahoma, whatever, they'll recognize your license. Same with concealed carry permits. Works the exact same fashion, right? Congress has to approve of these compacts under the Constitution. So what White is saying is these states could have just made these compacts. They weren't required to take title. That they failed to means to give it a little shove. I think you had a second question.
Yeah, the other question, do you want to talk about the 17th Amendment for a minute?
I think you want to. Tell us, what's the 17th Amendment? You tell us.
Well, it changed the senators from being elected by the legislators of the states to a popular vote.
Okay.
And just under the arguments of keeping the states and federal government in check, balance of power, etc. Is it possible to make an argument to say that this is actually unconstitutional under that? I don't know if you can do that.
Then what's unconstitutional?
That the amendment itself goes against these other deeper principles.
Are you asking if the 17th Amendment itself is unconstitutional?
That's a crazy question, but you have pre-existing notions right now that are.
Okay, so let me answer your question in three levels.
Understand.
Okay, so can an amendment to the Constitution itself be unconstitutional?
No.
Well, I don't know if that's right. So let's do this, right? Go to Article 5, right, in your Constitution. Okay? If anyone has a pad, just shout it out. Okay. Thank you, 53. Okay. The very last sentence, right? Article 5 of the Constitution is the amendment Constitution, right? How do you amend the Constitution? The very last sentence says, no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. What that means is, under the Constitution, every state has 2 senators. You cannot amend the Constitution to give some states 3 senators and some states 1 senator. Wait a minute. If you can amend the Constitution, how can you put limits on it? So this is an even better example of what he's asking, right? Could Congress pass an amendment saying, you know what, for the Senate, Rhode Island, this little pixelous state, I'm going tomorrow, as you all know now, this little tiny state, right, with 5 people in it, right? Why do they have the same number of senators as California, which is 50 million people, right? Could Congress pass an amendment saying, we'll give California 55 senators and we'll give Rhode Island 1 or 0? So the answer here is no. But if Congress ratifies it, who's to stop it? I'm sorry, if the people ratify it, that supersedes the 5th Article 5. In other words, an amendment would actually trump Article 5. The same way we have the 3/5 clause was in the Constitution, ratified the 14th Amendment, it's still in there, right? It's still there, but it has no effect. So if Congress amends the Constitution saying we don't like that, we want to have reducing suffrage. So it's a very deep question, which I don't want to answer for you now. But the short answer is I don't think it's violating any values. If the people, by the time the 17th Amendment was ratified, most states had elections anyway, so it didn't really change too much. But it was a big deal to change it to have that the states were no longer selecting their senators, right? Because think of it this way, right? Oh God, who's next? Cindy, you're next. Cindy, if a senator, right, in New York, say New York senator voted for this take title provision, right? What might the New York voters do? Yeah, so in theory, people of New York can throw out of office representatives and senators who voted for this take title bill. But what's more likely to happen, though? If all of a sudden New York is required to build a toxic waste dump in some guy's backyard, Cindy, who are they going to blame? The New York officials building the dump, or some member of Congress who voted on a bill 5 years ago? Exactly, the state officials, he's right. And this is O'Connor's point of political accountability. With commandeering, it's unclear who to blame, right? Everyone wants to blame someone. We were always outrageous at people, right? But do you blame the member of Congress who voted for like 1,000 bills and this is one of them? Or do you blame the person literally driving the dump truck and dumping it in your backyard? So with commandeering where the states are required to act, it's unclear who to blame. It's unclear where the blame falls. So that's another reason why O'Connor thinks that this is unlawful. Okay. So the holding then, right? The holding of New York versus United States, the commandeering doctrine. States can't be commandeered to take action. Why? Because that's not a power delegated to Congress. It's one that's reserved to the states. All right, that's the holding. Any questions on the O'Connor opinion? Is it Brian, your hand up?
Why isn't the federal government taking action to regulate something? In this case, they're essentially saying, why are you regulating this?
So mass VPA is another case which none of you studied. It involved, to grossly summarize, whether the Bush administration was required to take certain actions concerning climate change, just to grossly summarize. And in that case, Congress imposed an obligation on the executive branch. Can Congress impose obligations on the executive branch, Brian? Yeah, that's fine, right? Within some limits. But if Congress creates the EPA, it's an agency created by the Constitution, Congress tells the EPA what they have to do. Here, it's not imposing a duty on the executive branch, it's imposing a duty on the states, right? So there's no similar commandeering doctrine, right? Congress can tell the executive branch what to do. They create the EPA, they tell the EPA what to regulate. And that's what Mass EPA said Congress could do. It wasn't general welfare. It was a specific command within administrative law. Like there was the Clean Air Act. They argued required them to make certain findings concerning greenhouse gases. So it wasn't a general nebulous welfare argument.
But that's what the state had to argue in order to establish standing.
Right. Standing is about whether they're injured, right? And I don't want to go too far in a case we're not going to study. But the general doctrine is, can a state sue the federal government? Massachusetts argued that if the Bush administration didn't make certain findings concerning greenhouse gases and climate change, there would be a rise of the sea levels, which would result in an erosion of their coastlines, where Ted Kennedy goes for drives to that movie. Water goes higher, it's bad. Chappaquiddick, right? But the point is that was about standing, not about any sort of federal concerns. I appreciate that. Other questions in the majority? Yeah, Damon.
One more time about the relation of the state with the commerce and
I'd be happy to. Under the commerce powers, Congress can regulate the shipment of waste. but as a incidental power, right? In order to make the shipment of waste more effective, they can't require take title. They can't require the states to take title. That might be necessary, but it's not a proper incident of federal power. And because it's not a proper incident of federal power, it's not a power delegated to Congress, therefore it's reserved to the... Thank you. Yes, sir. Exactly right. Yeah, Samuel.
So does the necessary, or does the 10th Amendment kind of act as like a check to the necessary and proper clause?
It's not the 10th Amendment saying by itself, but the 10th Amendment informs it, right? The 10th Amendment explains why it's not proper, because if it's not delegated to Congress, it's reserved to the states, right? That's the key point. Make sense? Anything else in the majority opinion? Yeah, again, Justice White, I think Denny made this point a minute ago, says states can make their own compacts. There's a national problem. It's not for the courts to screw this up. Because, I mean, think about it, right? Because of the court's decision, it's going to come to a day where these states have this waste, they can't do anything with it. Then what? Justice Stevens makes a point which basically previewed his dissent in Printz a couple years later, that this entire doctrine's made up, right? There's nothing in the text of the Constitution requiring this. He mentioned the drafting of troops, which I think Denny alluded to earlier. Stevens doesn't like this doctrine at all. He thinks it's completely fictional. And we'll hit Stevens in. Yes, Rachel.
It didn't require the states to create legislation, then would it still be constitutional? That's what I gathered from
Oh, I see your question. So if the state didn't have to pass a law, could Congress tell a state to do something? Is that what you're asking? So I'll answer your question, Rachel, with another question. What, I'm sorry? Oh, is it Raquel? I'm sorry. Thank you. Abdul's bailing you out. Yeah, bailing me out, I guess, right? Raquel, let me answer your question this way. When I say you order a state to do something, who is the state? Right, so I say we order the state to take title of radiation, right? What does it actually mean? Is there some sort of map that wraps its arms around the radiation? I mean, I'm being silly, but when we say the government, right, the state, what are we talking about here? Who's actually going to be doing stuff? State officials, good. And on what basis can state officials do stuff? Ah, there it is. There it is. She got it. She got it. Very good. States don't exist as these geographic entities, right? They're made up of people. And even though this is a law requiring New York to take title, the New York Department of Environmental whatever, right, has people working there. And for New York to actually take ownership, they have to pass some law saying, here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we're going to dispose of it. We're going to build a dump in this guy's backyard, right? Whatever it is. So invariably, there has to be some legislation that has to be done. This comes up in the sanctuary seat debate also, which I'll mention briefly here. If a state passes laws saying we won't share information with the federal government about immigrants in our custody, and then Congress comes and says, no, you can't do that, right? You have to share information. There's an argument that that's actually requiring states to pass laws, right? They passed a law saying X, and now Congress said, no, you have to create a policy to share this information. That's engaging in active legislation. So invariably, when the states issue commands, they're issuing commands to legislate. So I think, and Raquel, your question is well put, there's always going to be legislation involved. States can't act willy-nilly. They can't just make crap up. They have to act pursuant to some local law. Does that make sense? Thank you. And thank you, Abdul, for giving me a correction. Trey.
And that surely the dispute requires specific performance.
That's that was Clinton's question, right? So in other words, the court the court has the power to issue specific performance, right? To issue an injunction to states to take X. But the upshot is that the majority says Congress doesn't have that power. So this is, I think, Clinton's question at the outset of class, right? Yeah. So there's this weird imbalance where the courts can order states to do X, but but Congress cannot order states to do X. And I think the answer is, and I think I gave this to Clint earlier, when the court issues an order, presumably it's because the Constitution requires it, right? If the Constitution requires that action, it's permissible. But here they're saying the Constitution does not allow Congress to issue such an order. It's a strange dichotomy, though, and I see a couple of you shaking your head. Stevens may have the better point on this one.
Well, I guess, why did Stevens try to assert that Congress has almost the same power as the court? I mean, obviously not executed the same way, but Stevens is basically saying because the court can do it, Congress should do it. That's like...
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a weird match, right, where the court can do it, but Congress can't. So Stevens says we should all be able to do it. And I don't know that there's a very good response in the majority to that point. Yeah, Clint.
I'm going to try to tie on with what we've been
Please.
talking about. So there were two cases that we didn't really, we may have been on one of them. The National League of Cities versus Estuary.
Yeah, it's mentioned briefly in the notes, yeah.
And then the Garcia versus
Yeah.
San Antonio Metropolitan. And in that, so talking about, we were talking about where the government can't, or not the government, where Congress cannot enact something that requires a state to legislate. In those two cases, it was about minimum wage of the FLSA, the federal labor, the standards on municipal employees or state employees. Congress passed it, it was ruled unconstitutional, and then in San Antonio, it was flip-flopped.
Yeah.
So now that it's been flip-flopped, how does that go against where Congress now has the right to tell the state that you must pay your state employees this?
So I don't mention these cases because they're not very relevant today, but there was a case called League of Cities, right, where the court said Congress can't regulate local wages. I was simplifying. And then, for state employees, right?
Yeah.
Local government wages. Some years later, Justice Blackmun, no relation, changed his mind, said we were wrong in Usury. And then in this case called Garcia, they said, no, Congress can regulate the wages of state and local employees. Okay. There's a difference between saying, if you're already paying these wages, here's how you have to do it, versus you have to do something in the first place. It's almost like the activity-inactivity distinction. If you're already buying insurance, Congress will regulate how that insurance is structured, but they can't make you buy it in the first place. Here, if the states were transporting waste, Congress would say, here's how you have to do it. You need to have safety, you need to have metal tanker trucks, whatever it is, but they can't make you in the first instance take the ownership of it. That was a bridge too far.
Perfect.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, that puts it in my notes perfectly.
Okay, good. I'm glad to help. All right, so any other questions on the New York versus United States case? Okay. All right, so on to the next case. The next case is a very important case. Now, it was not a Second Amendment case. I had you read Justice Thomas's dissent, and he's talking about the Second Amendment. I'm sorry, raise your hand, please. Yeah.
He wishes it was.
Well, this is a very common tactic of Justice Thomas. He'll say, well, here's a really important issue I want to talk about. None of the parties raised it, but I hope they do so in the future. And invariably, he's been in the court now almost 30 years. People get around to raising those arguments. So sometimes he'll say, we should write about this. And then people follow his lead. But the case, even though it wasn't about the Second Amendment, it really was. It wasn't. This was a case challenging provisions of the Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act. I always get the acronym wrong, but it's the Brady Gun Control Bill. The bill would have required instant background checks before you purchase a firearm from a federally licensed dealer. Now, I'm sure any of you have purchased guns in the last 20 years, so whatever. You go into the gun store, you fill out some paperwork, and a couple minutes later they give you an answer. Yes, you can buy it. No, you can't. Okay. That is based on a database called the National Instant Background Check Database, the NICS. Okay. You can run a person's information and get answers very quickly. That database did not exist when the Brady Act was first put into law. So instead, Anakari, what did Congress say we should do in the interim until this database is developed?
The local officials were required to
Okay, very good. Okay, so you have these CLEOs, C-L-E-O. These are the chief law enforcement officers of the jurisdiction, right? And Anakari, what exactly were these CLEOs required to do?
They would report themselves to their county chief law enforcement.
Good. Right, so let's just walk through this, right? So Anakari, I walk into a gun store in Montana and I say I want to buy a gun, right? Can I walk out with it right away under this regime? No. Okay, what has to happen?
It takes time.
Okay. How much time do the CLEOs have to run their background checks? Whit?
I didn't notice an actual time frame they had to do it.
Yeah. 5 days, yes ma'am. Okay. So Whit, if the dealer must wait 5 days before the sale is completed, is the chief law enforcement officer required to block the sale?
No, they're just required to make a judgment on whether it's
Okay, right. So the local law enforcement officer doesn't have to block the sale. He can, but he's required to give a written statement of why he thinks this transaction is unlawful. Okay, it's probably a written statement. Okay. Now, Jeanette, let me ask this question. Why do you think Congress decided to use local law enforcement officials to run these sorts of background checks before this national database was built?
It was a good little interim
Right.
solution for them, and since they were in the county, they could probably, no pun intended, or police.
Ah, very good. I like that. You can always intend puns with me. It's always good. Always intend puns. Very good. Yeah. So, I mean, you can imagine Congress like, look, this is easy, right? These people are already in the counties. They know everyone. They know people's background. What's the big deal? So, Raquel, not Rachel, but Raquel, if you were a lawyer for Congress this time, right, and you had read New York versus United States, would you think there's any problem with this sort of regime where you ask the local law enforcement officials to do these background checks? Well, if you just read New York, does New York resolve this case? Oh, why not? What was New York about? Oh, very good. Now, this was your question, so I'll ask you to again. It's perfect. You're right in line. Does this law, the Brady gun law, require states to enact laws? Or does it? Oh, you shook your head, and you're right behind it. Louder. Why? Yeah. Yeah, so let's just think about this for a minute, right? Anyone ever work for a police department? Any cops in here? Well, I usually have maybe one or two, right? Cops can't do whatever they want. They follow policy, right? Guidance, there are rules. So if someone comes in and wants to follow a report, you follow certain protocols, checklists, right? In order for a sheriff to actually implement this Brady handgun law, they have to develop some policies, right? How do we prioritize running background checks versus, I don't know, investigating murders, whatever else happens to be, right? How many days do we have, right? Who in our department is responsible for running these checks? So, Raquel, is there actually some sort of legislation that has to go on? Maybe, yeah. Okay. But I want to make this point clear. New York, for the United States, doesn't speak to this directly. In fact, New York says you can regulate individuals. You just can't regulate states. So this case represents a shift. Now let me give you some background on this case. The name of the case is Printz versus United States, and there's a picture of this in your book. I had this added in the most recent edition, so you have it. This is Sheriff J. Printz. He looks the role. He was the. This is an older picture of him. He was the sheriff and coroner of Ravalli County, Montana. It was a very small town. He was both. And I mean, this guy is, you know, the barrel chest. I mean, he looks the part for sure. And here's Printz standing outside the court. His lawyer, Steve Hallbrook, who's mentioned in one of the opinions. Here he is directing traffic, and that's basically his town square, right? He's from this small town in Montana. Here he is. Anyway. By the way, he's also a member of the NRA board, which was not an accident. Not an accident. The second sheriff was this guy, Sheriff Richard Mack. I've actually talked to him by email, and he once sent me this frantic email saying, this case should not be called Printz versus United States. It should be called Mack v. United States. Why? Yeah, Westbrook, right, last, right. Alphabetical order, right? He says, Mack M comes before Printz. Now, I think I mentioned this. Why do you think it was called Printz versus Mack? Yeah, I got to pay attention. Very good. Yeah, Printz filed first. But he sent me this long missive saying, don't call it Printz, call it Mack. I'm like, sorry, he lost it. But what happened was sheriffs across the country brought these lawsuits challenging this provision. And they said, you can't force us to engage in these background checks. Now, do you think these guys would have actually run background checks for gun purchases? No way. Not a chance in hell. Not going to happen, right? This is one of those come and take it moments, right? Not going to happen. But they challenged it in court. In fact, this is Dave Hardy, who's a lawyer from Arizona. That's Steve Hallbrook, who represented Printz. They challenged these things across the country. And it went to the Supreme Court. So again, this wasn't a Second Amendment. This wasn't a gun rights case, but it was. It was. Because this was the first time the federal government tried to regulate the sale of handguns nationwide. It just hadn't been done before. So the Scalia opinion has to be understood in this backdrop. By the way, this was during the brief period where Justice Scalia had a beard. It was a very brief period. This is one of the only pictures I've ever seen of it. It didn't last very long. I didn't like the look. It was, yeah, Clint.
I saw it on the video. I tried to Google and find a picture of him with the beard. I was unable to
Me
find
too.
it.
This is that's what I'm telling you. This is one of the only representations I've ever found of Scalia with a beard. This is about it. It might exist somewhere, but I think it was a very short-lived idea. Like, I've even asked the Supreme Court reporters. You can see people over here at this part of the bar, those are the reporters. They're always here with the little notepads, whatever. And I've asked them, they said, it was basically like for maybe less than a year. It was a very short period. But thank you. I'm glad you are curious about this as well. So let's walk through the case, right? Again, New York, the United States, was about commandeering states. This case was about whether state officials could be commandeered. Who am I up to? Ruth, I think you're next. Ruth, tell me, please. Is there anything in the text of the Constitution that commands this result? And what does Justice Stevens say? Stevens makes this point, I think, very forcefully. Is there like a commandeering clause of the Constitution? Commandeering clause? Oh, you gotta talk louder, please. Yeah, Stevens is very tough on this one, right? Stevens is like, this is made up, right? This is not real. There is no commandeering principle. The court is utterly making this up from whole cloth. Okay? I think I've done a decent enough job talking about necessary and proper. Scalia has like a paragraph on this. Wish he had more. But Stevens is not wrong, right? There's no commandeering clause in this. It doesn't exist. So instead, Irma, instead of looking to a text of the Constitution, what is the primary basis of Scalia's opinion? Like, what's he primarily focusing on? He mentioned at the very end, so you're paying attention to my lesson more than Scalia's. What's the primary basis of Scalia's opinion, though? Like the primary, what's he looking at? What does Scalia focus on mostly? What type of evidence, Irma, is he looking at? What sorts of evidence is he looking at? Alexandra's putting her name tag up. Yeah, Alexandra, want to take a step? What sort of evidence is Scalia looking at? I think that's what she said. No. What type of evidence is he looking at? He spends a lot of time talking about this. Yeah, Irma, take it, Deb. You give me text. What type of evidence? That's my answer. Maybe 3 questions down the road. Yeah, Jake. Historical evidence, right? Remember, what kind of historical evidence is he looking to? He looks to a lot, right? What sort of evidence is he looking at? Alexandra? Martin? What historical evidence is he looking at? Louder, I can't hear. Is there any historical evidence that had been done before? No. What does Scalia make of the fact that there's no evidence of Congress forcing state officials to take action? What does Scalia note about that? Louder, I really have trouble hearing you. You're not speaking any louder. Louder. Project. I'm not sure. David? What do we make of the fact that Congress doesn't have a practice of forcing state officials to take certain actions?
That they're doing something new with this.
Ah. And what do we make of this novelty?
It's unconstitutional.
Why would something that's novel perhaps not be lawful?
It's not granted Congress.
Well, but the fact that it has been done before, does that mean it's not granted?
Not necessarily.
Ah. So this raises a point, right? If we've had a republic for 200 years, and Congress has never done something before, and Scalia says, that's a pretty good sign that Congress can't do it. But what's the flip side to that, Robert? What's an example we've done of why that principle really hasn't carried the day at certain points in history? Very good. The mere fact that Congress didn't do it doesn't mean they can't. Right? Because this creates this argument that, well, if you've never done it before, it's unconstitutional. Well, you don't do something until you've done it. Right? And the leading example, I think, is the New Deal. Right? Those are lots of new things. Congress had never done that kind of stuff before. And at first the court said, no, you can't do this. And then we had 37 and this stuff. But the fact that it's never been done before is, I think, evidence that it might be unlawful. But it doesn't resolve the issue, I think, to the extent Scalia says it does. Your hand was up a minute ago?
Sort of long way. I just think that it came down to the way it was written as a law. There was other ways they could have gotten this result that they wanted.
We'll get there. That's proper. Right, we'll get there. But I want to do this first, right? Now, Shivani, Scalia does recognize that there is a history of some state officials being commandeered by Congress. What kind of officials does he say have been commandeered? Okay, good. That's the type of law, but what sort of state officials have been commandeered to implement those laws? All right. What are our 3 branches? Yeah, talk louder. Okay, good. Which of those branches, Shivani, does Scalia say have been commandeered in the past? No. Damon? You saved yourself, yeah. What are some examples, Damon, of how state judicial officials have been commandeered in the past?
For drafting people, the law.
What does it mean for state judicial officials to be commandeered, Damon?
The judges are bound.
I know you're reading the clause. That's fine, but I'm talking about examples that Scalia gives. Kevin?
You mentioned that like state judges were
Good.
ordered to carry out like federal
Very good.
orders.
Yeah, exactly right. So Scalia says, in the early years of a republic, state judges were asked to carry out certain sorts of duties involving citizenship, shipments, boats, etc. As we know, our Constitution creates one court, the Supreme Court. There was no guarantee that the lower courts would be created. Maybe they would be, maybe they wouldn't. So in the early years before our federal courts were, beefed up and in good shape, Congress would rely on state courts to do that. Now, I think one of you was saying this a minute ago, but Gabriel, what distinction does Scalia draw about why it's okay to commandeer judges, but not a sheriff, an executive branch official? What's the distinction that Scalia draws here? And he and Stevens fight over this extensively. He draws a distinction based on the text of the Constitution. What distinction does he draw? Well, so what? That's not the answer. No. What distinction does Scalia draw of why state judges can be conscripted, but not state sheriffs, state executive officials? Taylor?
Did it go down to about like how sheriffs are not individuals and how like judges are?
I'm looking for text of the Constitution. There's a specific answer. Amber? You're gonna feel silly when I say it. Joanna? Yeah, it's on the board. It's highlighted. My God, you guys, I'll come back to Gabriel in a minute. But yeah, Juliana, just go. So what's the text of the Supremacy Clause? Why is that relevant? Okay, so let's read this through, right? Article 6, Supremacy Clause. Very important piece, probably the most important sentence in the entire Constitution, in my humble opinion. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which we made in pursuance thereof, that is, where Congress has the enumerated powers, okay, and all the treaties made, under the authority of the United States. That body of law shall be supreme. Okay? Now, we all study the last part. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding, right? So if a state law conflicts with a federal law that's properly enacted, the state law is set aside. But people forget this part, right? The judges in every state shall be bound thereby. That is, they're bound by the supreme law. So this is, look, it's right there, right? Judges are bound by supreme law. They're bound to enforce it. Does it say that the state executive branch officials are bound? Doesn't say that. Does it say the state legislative officials are bound? It does not say that. It says the state judicial officials, the judges in every state, are bound. And from this, Scalia says, you can't commandeer, right? The inclusion of judges, but the exclusion of other officials means that those other officials cannot be bound by federal law, right? They can't be required to enforce it. That's Scalia's argument. What does Stevens say in response to this? Gabriel? What does Stevens say in response to this? He responds, I think quite well.
Says that when Congress exercises power delegated by the Constitution, we may impose obligations to act.
What's Stevens' specific response, Taylor, on this point about this executive versus judicial distinction? There's no what?
Restriction.
No.
That without their name being in the clause, they're not bound.
What's Stevens' response, though, about the sorts of positions that the sorts of roles these judges were doing in the 1800s? Amber?
Well, Stevens, I don't know about the judges, but I know that he's saying, or his response to the majority was that private citizens
No, I want you to answer my question. What does Stevens say about historical evidence? Anyone know the answer? Yeah, Evan.
They take an oath to the Constitution.
Well, that's true, but what else? Everyone takes an oath. Clinton?
So, Stephen's response, in paraphrasing, that we all have a constitutional, or an obligation to act, everyone has an obligation to act to uphold the Constitution.
Right, everyone takes an oath, but specifically, he rejects the historical characterization, right? What he rejects how Scalia characterized what these judges were doing. What's his argument? Yeah, Trey.
Is it where he says the founders approved the intention of asking the federal government by empowering it
No.
to act through local officials?
No. What exactly were these state judges doing? Were these judicial functions? Donnie?
Was it that he had the early judges in place, like performing?
Ah, there it is. Gold star, right? They once saw the School of Rock. He gets the gold star, right? Yeah. That's a good show. I actually liked it. I didn't think I liked it. I never saw the movie. Stevens says Scalia is misrepresenting the evidence, and they would always go back and forth, that these judges were actually engaging in executive-type officials. They were inspecting boats, right? They were inspecting the crew. They were doing things that weren't traditional. So this entire judges every bound thing, Scalia says, Stevens says is just BS, right? It's garbage. I should note that a couple years ago, Justice Stevens, who's still alive, he's kind of in his mid-90s by this point, wrote a book called Six Amendments, where he proposed 6 amendments to the Constitution. Right, he would add 6 amendments to the Constitution. Now, none of these will get enacted, right? But judges, they write books because they can. But he made an important change to the Supremacy Clause. I want you to read his change to the Supremacy Clause, right? It's in bold. I've highlighted it. He would have added 4 words to the Supremacy Clause, so that the judges and other public officials in every state shall be bound thereby, right? I think that period's errant, right? He wanted to say, screw Scalia, right? Let's amend the Constitution so that all judges and all public officials, executive and legislative, are thereby bound. This amendment was designed to overturn Printz. I think it would have, actually. But the fact that he had to make this amendment means Printz isn't necessarily wrong, right? The fact that he actually proposed this means that there might be some textual argument for Scalia. Now, maybe right, maybe wrong. But Stevens was very bitter about this case. He was very bitter about a lot of cases he lost. And this book was basically like a burn book, right? Of all cases he lost, how to turn his dissent into majority by changing the Constitution. It's a lot easier just to add a new justice and replace Scalia. That'd be a lot easier. But anyway, I didn't like the book. But this one I like mentioning. Yeah, basically the entire book was all my dissents be majority opinions, and we should do that by changing the Constitution. Lovely. And when you're retired, you have nothing to do. Okay. So everyone get that part of Scalia's opinion, right? Now, I want to move on to necessary and proper at the very end. And he has this last paragraph, right? I think it's only one paragraph. He says, the necessary and proper clause is the last best hope of defending ultra vires congressional action. Taylor, what does ultra vires mean? Yeah, ultra vires means outside the scope of authority, right? It's the last best hope of defending ultra vires congressional action. And we described this, right? Whenever you have any doubt about law's constitutionality, you gotta consider necessary and proper. It's not enough just to do commerce, whatever it is. You always got to go necessary and proper. So Scalia says regulating the sales of handguns, right? That's interstate commerce, right? Unlike in Lopez, where there's no commercial activity, here it's the sale of handguns. So there's no doubt that you can loop this into interstate commerce. But he writes this: when a law carrying into execution Commerce Clause, when a law carrying into execution the Commerce Clause violates state sovereignty, it is not a law proper for carrying to execution, right? The key point is, when it violates state sovereignty, when it intrudes upon the states, that makes it not a proper law. Therefore, Congress lacks the power to enact it, and it's not a power that Congress has. The power is reserved to the states. But you see the circularity, right? I just want to see the circularity. What makes it not proper? It violates state sovereignty. Why does it violate state sovereignty? Because it's not proper. I said it again, right? What makes it not proper? It violates state sovereignty. Why does it violate state sovereignty? Because it's not proper. There's a huge circularity to this reasoning, and you know, I'm not going to defend Scalia in this. He could have done this a little bit better. This is why I think Roberts, who links it to the McCulloch opinion, does a much better job, right? What Scalia is actually saying here, and this is why I always get in trouble when I rewrite stuff, but I think what Scalia is actually getting at here is the smaller power to regulate guns, right? Right? Gun sales, right? The smaller power to regulate gun sales does not permit the requirement, this great power of requiring the CLEOs to run the background checks, right? They can regulate gun sales, that's fine, commerce. But the bigger issue of forcing these sheriffs to run these background checks, these law enforcement officers, that cannot be subsumed and necessary and proper. And that renders this great substantive and independent power, right? Regulating these handgun sales is trivial. Going after the sheriffs is a big deal. And you can't sweep in the elephant into that mouse hole. Okay, that's what I think Scalia was getting at. He doesn't say it well here. He says it's better in Raich, I think. And Roberts does it even better in the Obamacare decision. If you notice, one of my frustrations with these cases is they don't actually always say what they mean. We have to keep in mind is when a justice writes a majority opinion, they have to persuade 4 other people to join it. And very often, sentences that might garner 1 or 2 or 3 votes won't garner 4 or 5 votes. So you have to take stuff out. And unfortunately, Justice Kennedy doesn't like to say things very clearly. He loves the passive voice. It's his thing, right? So maybe Scalia wanted to make this very precise, but he couldn't to get the 5th vote. Kennedy maybe wanted to leave stuff open that they can clarify in the future. This is what he loves. So when you read these opinions, if you feel this like nagging sense of like, wow, that wasn't satisfying, I don't know exactly what he's saying, you're not an idiot, right? You're not alone. I feel the same when I read these cases. Like, it's like, why didn't you complete the loop? Why didn't you go all the way? They never do that. So one of the reasons why law professors are awful human beings is we try to do that for you. We try to bridge the gap of what they're meaning, and maybe I'm wrong, right? You know, Scalia's not here anymore. I don't know what he meant. I can't ask him, but I do the best I can. Yeah, Derek.
How do they do it? So they all write their own opinions and just see which one they agree with.
So here's how it works, right? The case is argued, right? Arguments are held Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Every Friday after arguments are held, they have what's called a conference. And at the conference, they all announce how they are going to vote on the case, right? They start with the Chief Justice and they work their way down. And the Chief Justice says, I'm going to vote for Printz. And then Stevens goes, I'm going to vote for the United States. Then at the end, they count the votes, right? The most senior justice in the majority, which is usually the Chief Justice, but not always, gets to assign the opinion. So in this case, there were 5 votes. Chief Justice Rehnquist was most senior. Is okay, Scalia, you get to write the majority opinion. Scalia then writes the majority opinion, and he circulates it to everyone. And everyone has a chance to review it. They make edits. Now, if a justice makes the edit, then someone joins along. If he says, I am not going to make that edit, he might lose a majority opinion. And that happened to Scalia a couple times where he wrote such acerbic, biting language, he would lose a majority. Happened a couple times. I can count them. The dissent, though, is they assign it themselves, right? The most senior justice in the dissent gets the right to dissent. Stevens, at that point, was the most senior justice. He gave the dissent to himself. And others can join it. But it happens that sometimes the majority becomes a dissent and flips around. It does happen. But they always circulate the opinions after it's argued. That's the general gist of how it's written. Yeah? Souter. Yeah.
He talks about how they've compensated for using
That's a good point, right?
So have they written the bill to compensate them to kind of compel them into action or incentivize them to get their action necessary, proper, and spending?
Well, so just I'll do Souter. I'll do Stevens in a minute. Let me answer Jonathan's question on Souter for a minute. Souter said, "You're not paying them, right? You're making them run these background checks, and there's no money for it. Why aren't you paying them?" Scalia responds to this and directly says, "Well, how do you decide what the appropriate rate is? Usually, if I want to go join the police department, they said we'll pay you X dollars a month. I was like, I'll take it or I won't take it. Is there a choice to take this money and negotiate over the amount? No, it's an order. So even if there's a dollar amount provided, I don't think that would have saved it because the states had no choice. They say, no, I'd rather go investigate murders with my limited time, right? I don't think there's a good use of my time. You saw the commandeering problem. Right? You can't force someone to take a job and then pay them for it. That's still commandeering.
If you provide enough money to get resources today.
Well, okay, they could have said, if you want to get this funding, we're going to ask you to do these background checks. That's different, right? That's dole, right? This is, we're not going to give you a choice. Take the money or else.
But then they could have typed necessary and proper providing for the general welfare of the state.
It's still, but they're still making them run these background checks with or without money. I don't think it would have made a difference. Okay. All right. Now, Justice Stevens' dissent is very similar to the dissent in Lopez, right? And the dissent in Morrison. It's like, what's going on here, right? For 60 years after the New Deal, Congress basically could do whatever they wanted. And now all of a sudden, you're like finding these new limits on Commerce Clause. You find these limits on Necessary and Proper Clause. You find these limits on the spending power. You'll read in class next week, they're finding limits on Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, right? All these new limits are being read into the Constitution. Like, where did these come from? And I think what Stevens recognized why he's so angry is that the court became more conservative. It had. He had Reagan appointed several justices. He had Bush appoint a couple justices. That the court shifted to the right. And sorts of arguments that were just rejected out of hand for 50 or 60 years were now gaining some salience. Trey emailed me at this. He actually, Stevens referred to the Thomas opinion as revisionist, right? It's not in your book, but Stevens said that Thomas is revisionist. He's rewriting history. I think Thomas would respond to that. Well, actually, the New Deal court rewrote history. I'm going back to the original. But without doubt, Thomas is pushing back against this sort of precedent. Okay? Stevens makes the argument that under the Constitution, Congress can regulate individuals, that this is a government of we the people. Congress has the power to tax individuals. They have the power to draft individuals. They have the power to sterilize individuals. They have the power to inoculate individuals. Why can't they have the power to commandeer them to engage in this action? To this, Scalia says, I think this point has a good point, if Congress can't regulate the states, how can they bypass that by regulating state officials, right? It's a cheat. Okay, you can't commandeer states, fine, commandeer state officials. So it depends how you conceive of this distinction. Okay? All right. Any questions about the Stevens opinion? Okay. Let me talk briefly about midterms, because I have a little bit of extra time which I usually don't have. Okay. Your first line, I think, is this week? Okay, I think is it tomorrow? Okay. Yeah, so you're going to go over the, you're going to be going over the midterm. Let me just walk you through this briefly. Where is it? Okay. Nothing ever works when I want it to work. Okay. Syllabus. There we go. Okay, so the syllabus includes links to midterms from years past. I have to update the A+ answer, but I'll do that later. I encourage you at some point to at least take a look at the midterm from last semester. You should, in the next maybe couple weeks, be able to start looking at it and understanding the questions. Let me walk you through the format of what this is going to look like. That. Okay. The midterm, it's going to be in class, it's going to be 90 minutes. One thing you have to keep in mind is completely open book. Bring whatever you want, it will not help you. If you couldn't tell by now, we're now, what, a couple weeks into the semester, your notes don't usually help you very much when I call on you. It's going to be like that for the exam. So you need to know this stuff very well. The second thing to keep in mind is the word count. Let me explain this. The 1,000 word limit is used for your fairness. Some of you can write 5,000 words in an hour. Some of you can't do that. I know that exists. I was one of those persons. I could, smash the keyboard. By limiting you to words, it puts you in the exact same playing field. Everyone is equally judged. I can't compare someone who writes 800 words with someone who pumps out 5,000 words. I can't compare that. The good part is this makes you concise. Keeps your answers very precise. And I assure you, this makes grading a lot more fair for everyone. There are two types of questions that I ask. One type of question is set in the present day. That is, it's the year 2018 now. Yes, we're in 2018. The year is 2018, and you're obligated to analyze a question under current law. I also test you on some point in the past. This one was 1860, right? So right around the election of Abraham Lincoln. The difficulty of me giving you these sort of other questions is you need to know how laws developed, right? Your homework won't help you here. You need to know what the case law was in a given point in time. Now, in the final exam, I'll give you both types, one present day and one point in the history. The midterm, I'll give you either. I don't know yet. I haven't written it yet. I'll surprise you. But you need to be ready for either one. One of the upshots of using the historical approach is that I don't want you citing modern cases, and this is going to be very difficult for you. You're not getting credit for that. If people do it, they're not getting credit for it. You can discuss in general where case law is headed, but you can't rely on that because that hasn't happened yet. At all junctures, you should be citing cases. This is different from the other semesters in torts and contracts. If you notice, whenever I ask you a question, I'm asking what clause of the Constitution, right? What case? That's what I want. You got to cite something, right? You can't just give me the rule. You have to give me a clause of the Constitution or a case, and then, just saying, Printz or Lopez is fine. I don't need the full citation. No blue booking. I don't need that stuff. I don't care. The exam always has 5 parts. Always 5 parts. And what I encourage you to do is, before you do anything, you first read the instructions, right? I know it sounds really dumb, but you have no idea how many students don't read the instructions. They miss important stuff. I always put useful information there to guide you. So start off by reading the instructions. Then read the 5 parts of the question, right? You're not going to know what these things mean. By reading the questions, it tells you more or less what I'm looking for. Before you even read the fact pattern, read the questions. Trust me on this one, right? At that point, then, you actually read the question. And as you go through the question, say, aha, this discussion relates to question number 3, and this question relates to number 4, right? Actually mark up your paper. Mark up your paper to say, aha, this part's my question number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Generally, they're in order, right? The first paragraph is question 1, the second paragraph is question 2. I don't want to trick you on that either. One of the biggest difficulties of the exam is time. You should be able to finish. This is meant to be finished. But you need to guide yourself. So, simple math, right? If you have 90 minutes for one question, and you take an hour to read the question, that means you have 30 minutes to write. Probably not the best ratio. If you have 45 minutes of reviewing the question, outlining, and 45 minutes of writing, you'll be on time. You need to figure out for yourself what the magic number is, which is why I encourage you to take one of the old midterms at home beforehand. What I recommend to most students is probably spend 10 or 15 minutes, maybe even 20 minutes reading before you even start writing. Okay? That leaves you an hour left over for 5 questions. If you have an hour for 5 questions, spend 12 minutes per question. Time yourself. If you have difficulty with your exam and timing, put a clock, not an Apple Watch, an actual real watch, and time yourself, right? Each question is worth the same number of points. Don't spend 45 minutes on question number 1 and leave question number 5 blank. That's an easy way to fail, right? If you leave something blank, you're probably going to not get a very good grade. So open book, whatever this. So yeah, before the midterm, try to take one of them at home. You can even take this one, the fall 2017 one. That's when you go over your Langdell. Take this one at home, and then compare it to the A+ answer on your own time. Okay. Questions? Yeah, Damon, then Clinton.
Does midterm count towards our final grade?
It does, and let me explain how it counts. At South Texas, we're not allowed to grade you on a midterm for 1L classes. I don't like that rule, but that's the rule. I can't make this count towards your final grades percentage. If I had my way, I'd make this maybe 20% of your final grade. I can't do that. What I can do is make this part of your participation score. So if you flunk the midterm, I can bump you down a third, so like a B to a B minus or a C to a C minus. So I reserve that right. If you don't show up for the midterm, you fail. That's an easy one, right? So if you blow it off and don't show up, or you come in late, you fail. Don't do that. coming in late for an exam is very distracting. That one I actually am very, very upset about. Okay, unless you email me otherwise, you're taking it that day.
You mean fail the midterm or fail the class?
Well, you fail the midterm, right? Yeah, if you fail the midterm, then I can bump you down a third. Right. If you fail the final exam, I can't help you. That happens. The second part, what was your other question?
The other question is, what if we handwrite and there's no word count?
Well, you can count with your finger. I strongly encourage you to type. I strongly encourage you to type. You're not helping yourself by handwriting. This requires editing and moving stuff around and deleting. As a general matter, people handwrite do worse. It's a fact of life. You'll have to take the bar in a couple years. Ask people who passed the bar how many of them handwrote, and the answer will be very small. So if you can't type an exam, learn. I mean that sincerely. It's for your bar, if nothing else. All right, people are packing up. Clint, you want to make it quick?
My question, Ken, you answered it, fair enough.
Very good. All right, I'll see you all in class on Tuesday. Thank you so much. You know where I'm going at. You know my calendar.
You're not going to give a date like 1933, but